French President Emmanuel Macron has set off a 3-month national debate during a meeting with about 600 mayors and local officials in Normandy. What he called a grand debate will take place through local meetings and on the internet, focusing on taxes, public services, climate change, and democracy. President Macron, whose popularity ratings hit record lows at the end of last year, hopes the process will appease the Yellow Vest movement. The anti-government protest went on its 9th straight weekend as thousands of protesters took to the streets. Repeated clashes broke out between the protesters and the police. The movement began over a fuel tax rise last November, but quickly expanded to become a wholesale rejection to Mr. Macron's economic policies.
Il faut refuser la violence, parce qu'il ne sort rien de la violence.
We must not give in to violence, because nothing comes out of violence. We mustn't engage in demagoguery, because adding anger to the debate has never been a solution. But we must build the means to find solutions for the country.
So how could Mr. Macron's peace offering to the people go? Let's turn to our panelists to find out. In Paris, we have Joël Ruet, who is the chairman of the Bridge Tank. Also in Paris, we have Alexei Poulain, who is the co-founder of Le Monde Modern. And also in our Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, once again, director of the Department of European Studies with China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome. So, shall we have the two French panelists helping us to understand your perspective of the realities on the ground? Mr. Ruet first. What's next?
Jianwei, good evening. You mentioned about chaos, you mentioned about debate. I hope debate is not leading to chaos. I think what's next is a real sound debate. And it's only the second act of the revolution launched by Mr. Macron. When he won the election, he destroyed the parties. The people in the street, they voted to reinforce for destroying the parties. They did not want to be recuperated by the parties.
Okay.
Now we'll have a real debate because we need to invent new forms of democracy, new mediums, new institutions. That's the
there's a lot of hope being pinned on to those so-called national debate and great debate. As you may know, the debate could play on for quite some time. Mr. Poulain, your thoughts?
I don't think it will be a real debate. I think what we've heard from the majority is that the question have been asked by the president, and the answer will be only for the question asked by the president, not really by the question asked for the French people. It looks more like a new campaign in light of the European election coming in May, rather than a real need of debate or a real open debate. The questions, and you have red lines about ISF, about taxes, and clearly the policy of Emmanuel Macron won't change after the debate. There might be some cosmetic changes, but the core of Emmanuel Macron policy is to be a liberal in France and to try to make sure that there is more debt market and put people in difficult position, in more difficult position. And if you hear him talking, it's always the fault of the poor, the fact that they're in this situation. So it looks like a political campaign more than a debate.
Mr. Cui, of course, when the President Macron proposed this grand debate, at least two things can be achieved. One is to let people have their air out. At least there's a debate, right? They were complaining there's no debate, and the President was saying everything, and therefore put into the policy. Now there is a debate. Secondly, this is also, in a way, responding to people's accusation that the President is leading the country to nowhere without the input of the people. And now there is the input of the people. But a debate is a debate. It's not a policy-making process. So, Mr. Cui, once again, what's next?
Yes, I think firstly, there will be a debate in French society. I think it could be better than there is no ending debate, because I think that the major purpose from the government, from President Macron, is try to do something to help.
Well, you could say the French are debating anyway.
Yes, and also I think of course, it's a kind of a reaction from the government and President Macron towards this Yellow Vest movement. Yeah. Because once there will be some more movement in the street, it will be, I mean, very, very bad for this reform agenda for the government. But of course, I think now the question is how about the censoriousness from the government, from President Macron, just like our French guest mentioned, that there should be a real and a two-way debate between the people and the government.
Well, you're talking about the election now. Yes. It seems that, Mr. Cui, that's
but otherwise, I think there will be some, maybe, it would be another kind of stimulation for more and more movement in the street.
I understand that, Mr. Puet, for the French tradition, what's happening in the streets is very much likely to be reflected eventually and quickly into the national politics. But on the other hand, how much of the resentment being expressed by a few thousand people or maybe 10,000 people, 20,000 people into the streets, reflecting the national picture, it could be a question mark, and therefore how much attention they should get, and also how much adjustment of the policies eventually already being implemented should be readjusted. That's also a very interesting question, isn't it, Mr. Ruet? Now when you think about it.
No, I agree with what was said. There is a risk it's a kind of political campaign before the European election, and this will partly be. But if Emmanuel Macron and if the government don't listen, this will not be sustainable. So I think sooner or later they will have to listen, and they will listen. And Tianwei, as you mentioned very rightly, you know, France, some part of what is expressed in the street will percolate into the reforms. Now I think that this organized debate, it's not just a debate, it's an organized debate, will allow to separate what has no legitimacy in the claims of the street with what has legitimacy in the claims of the street. And I think this is a process where everyone has to be cautious, but this will be a progressive process.
All right, let's take a look at what Mr. Macron has been proposing. In Mr. Macron's address recently, he insisted that France is a country where solidarity exists. In his consultations, he asked whether there were public services that should be abolished because they are not cost-effective. Macron also has pointed out to high-speed trains, mostly free education, subsidized health care, and excellent infrastructure at France, taxes at work. To a certain extent, I have to say to our panelists, Mr. Boulin, what he said, the president said, it's true that he does have a grand blueprint for your country, France, and yet, is it a communication issue, or is the president too wishful thinking based on what the current realities are in France?
I think it's true that we have a social security system. We have a lot of things in France that works well, and apparently it costs a lot of money, and too much money, because of the tax burden. So the question is, where do you get the money to fund these social services? And this question isn't asked by President Macron. The first question is, which social services, which public services should we cut because we don't have the money? It's not the question of where should we get the money, because there is a lot of money in tax evasion. There is a lot of money to just reinvent and reinvest in a transition measure for the green economy, but also to make sure that our public services work well. Why is Emmanuel Macron selling energy, hydro energy assets of France, or privatizing Aéroport de Paris, the Parisian airport? What is the sense of privatization? It's short-term money for the state budget, because France, of course, has a big debt and a small budget. But the question is, why can't we find out social and tax justice so that the state works and has the means to function well?
Okay. I don't want to use that word, but really, it is all about that. It's money, money, and money. So, Mr. Cui, the nature of this debate, I guess we come to a very solemn point. That is, where does the money come from? We repeated that debate many times, and friends also on a daily basis, I guess, right now. But to what extent is the issue of money relevant? Is this about money issue, or is this about vision issue, or is this about whether friends who come to a consensus about what kind of country its people want?
I think both of them, or all of them, will be a big issue.
You're making things so complicated, Mr.
Yes,
Cui, I have to say.
Exactly. Because also, firstly, yes, regarding to the money issue, yes, just like our French guest mentioned, that still there are a lot of the financial restriction for French government to do something, because now, once there are some more investment from government in some reform, certainly there will be a bigger question for the French government. Secondly, I think maybe another big issue is once there is money, but where is the money from, and where is the money going? I think that would be a very big concern, especially from average people, because if we look at this origin of the movement, we can find out people were wondering that how could you take some more tax from average people? Why doesn't the government to take some more money from the rich people? And then for the new energy, for the climate change issue, for average people, they could not have so broad vision about the climate change issue itself. They just want to know that, okay, how could I spend less once we could not get some more, better situation?
That's right. This is what I really want to ask, following all of your insights, gentlemen. What exactly is the nature of this debate? What exactly is the nature of this apparent crisis in President Macron's term? Is it about the art or sufficient amount of art of communication? Or is it about a country which is very divided and certainly also has enormous wealth gap? And if that is so, is there a plan at all, short term? And thirdly, if France is getting into such a big trouble, we look at the overall European situation, how will this case study set a precedent for the other countries and economies which might have different degrees of similar problems? Let's go to Mr. Boulogne first. If you could be brief, different from the French tradition, because we're running out of time. So let me have 1 minute insight from you, sir. Mr. Boulogne?
Okay. I think this crisis is not the sole responsibility of Emmanuel Macron. It's been years of management, of political leadership in France, where the policies always been in the same direction. And we have also an issue about the EU and the fact that we can't go over 3% of debts in the state budget, which of course makes things difficult to run a state. But the main question, and it's everywhere the same question, is the fact that big countries are divided between the one who have and the one who have nots. Right. And so far the one who have nots are visible and they are protesting or they are voting in our democracies. So that's where the crisis comes from, is that so far the have-not could believe in progress, could believe that there would be a change in the future. It's not the case anymore. All
right, Mr. Cui, you also have fairly only 1 minute and less.
Yes, I think maybe the purpose from President Macron tried to deal with the issue of so-called democratic deficit now in a French society. But now I'm afraid that how about the approach of this debate we'll have. Once there is not a two-way or open debate happened, I'm afraid that the final outcomes will be strengthen the impression from average people about the image of the current French government, and especially President Macron himself as the representative of elite, of the rich people. Once it happens, I think there will be a failure of this debate.
All right, last but certainly not least, Mr. Ruet, also 1 minute, if you can, sir.
Yeah, Tianwei, you mentioned about money. I don't think it's the point. I think it's budget. National budget, household budget. National budget is about making choices, collective choices. No country in the world can make everything. We have to choose. Now we have to make a new collective vision. That's one part of the debate. On the households, I would not say you have the have-nots. You have rather what remains after you've paid all the compulsory taxes, which is the amount of freedom you keep out of your money. And then it's about negotiating that. That's the other part of the budget, of the debate. And that's again a part of choice. So, you know, it's choice for the elites and the government, choice for the have-nots or the people. It's about choice, so it's about debate. And you see the French can be short sometimes.
Well, they're not short of anything in that sense, the two things you just mentioned. For now, I want to thank the three of you, gentlemen, for helping us understand all the latest of what's going on in France and the nature of the real debate. Cui Hongjian, Joël Ruet, Alexis Poulin, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.